The movement of a canoe is like a reed in the wind. Silence is part of it, and the sounds of lapping water, bird songs, and wind in the trees. It is part of the medium through which it floats, the sky, the water, the shores. There is balance in the handling of a canoe, the feeling of its being a part of the bodily swing. No matter how big the waves or how the currents swirl, you are riding them as you would ride a horse, at one with its every motion. When the point is reached where the rhythm of each stroke is as poised as the movement of the canoe itself, weariness is forgotten, and there is time to watch the sky and the shores without thought of distance or effort. At such a time, the canoe glides along obedient to the slightest wish, and paddling becomes as unconscious and automatic an effort as breathing. Should you be lucky enough to be moving across a calm surface with mirrored clouds, you may have the sensation of suspension between heaven and earth, of paddling not on the water, but through the skies themselves. Hey everybody, it's Michael from A Mandolin, a Map, and a Book, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Singing Wilderness by Sigurd Olson, which is what I was just reading from. First off, the copy of the book I'm reading is a library copy from my university library, University of North Dakota, and it's really old. It's a 1956 first edition of the book, and you can see that down there, 1956, and it's first edition as well, and it's pretty cool. The book itself is a little beat up. You can't read the title. Maybe if the light was really good, you could, but the title's been worn off. You can just barely see it with the eye. Little damage to the spine and stuff, but it's pretty cool. The library got this. I don't know when they got it, but they had it at the latest by 1980. That's when the first checkout date is on here. And anyway, cool book written in the mid 1950s by Sigurd Olson. A little bit about Olson. He was a Minnesotan. He's passed away now, but he was a Minnesotan. Originally, he was from Michigan. Actually, he was born on the UP and grew up there on the shores of the Big Lake. Anyway, went to school, some kind of science degree, and taught, I think, biology. I probably should have been more clear about that before I started this. But I think taught biology or something like it. He got a teaching job at what used to be Ely College in Ely, Minnesota, now Vermilion Community College in Ely. And Ely, if you don't know, is in northeast Minnesota, not too far from Superior. It's close to the North Shore. It's in the Quetico-Superior region, which is what he writes about mostly, which is what all this book is written about. Quetico-Superior country is basically northeast Minnesota and extreme southern, right across the border, southern Ontario. It's really wild, even still. It's remote, it's rugged. The Boundary Waters canoe area is there, so there's lots of canoeing that happens. Less hiking, but hiking, skiing. It's a wilderness area, and that's in part, a good part, thanks to Olson, who was also a conservationist, not just a writer and teacher. But he was a conservationist, apparently was friends to some degree with Hubert Humphrey, the Minnesota senator who ran for president, and was a big part of getting Boundary Waters and all that up in their declared wilderness back in the 60s and 70s. So he's an important figure in Minnesota conservation history, as much or maybe even more so than he is as a writer. But I enjoyed his writing as well. He's a good writer, although I'll have a couple of qualifications with that as I go on. But right from the beginning, well, I guess it's not the beginning, I'm like 5 minutes in, but I do recommend this book, especially if you like writing about the outdoors, the non-human world. It's good. and you'll enjoy it, especially if you're interested in northern outdoor riding, which I am. He writes really poignantly and really well about about northern Minnesota and the Great Lakes area, and yeah, would definitely recommend it. The section that I was reading from at the beginning is from a chapter called "The Way of a Canoe," and that's a pretty often, if you have an anthology that of any kind that has Olson in it, that's usually in there somewhere. It's one of his more famous pieces. And that's the very first chapter of the second section of the book, which is the summer section. And you can see also, side note, these illustrations are fantastic. Um, they're really wonderful. And they're done by, what's the guy's name? His last name is Jacques. Francis Jacques, I think. Yeah, Francis Lee Jacques. Um, and and he does these illustrations. There's one for each chapter and one for each season. And they're so good. And I guess I should actually back up a bit and talk about how the book is organized. It's organized in 4 parts with a map and a sort of prefatory essay called The Singing Wilderness at the beginning. But it's organized in 4 parts, each part corresponding to a season. So it starts with spring, and then you have summer, fall, autumn, and winter. And each of those sections, each of those sort of main sections of the book, has around 8 essays or vignettes or reflections. You could call those a number of different things, but it has 8 of those, around 8 of those pieces that make up that season's section. And they're all related to, aspects of that season. Like, for instance, summer has, canoeing, campfires, fishing. Well, autumn has a chapter called Wild Geese, The Last Mallard. Winter has Coming of the Snow, Trapper's Cabin, Birds of the Ski Trails, that sort of thing. So they're organized by what time of the year, they're set in, basically. That said, there's no larger storyline that links this whole book together. There's no, it's not a trip. It's not a time spent in the wilderness. It's not the record of a particular year. It's just broken up by different times of the year, right? So I think he's taking from a few years of experience, probably quite a few years of experience, throughout the book. It's not written in any sort of linear fashion. Pretty much every essay or every vignette is a standalone piece. You could theoretically, I think, jump in and read this in any order you wanted to. It's not part of one larger storyline, but it works, I think. And some of these pieces were published. So some of these pieces were published in North Country, The Living Wilderness, Sports Illustrated, Gentry, National Parks Magazine, Sports Afield, and the Gopher Historian. That's who he thanks at the beginning for letting them be republished. So some of these were originally published as standalone pieces, and that's the sense you get, that these are, they're pretty short. The average length is probably like 6 pages or something. They're like super easy to read. They're not theoretical at all. Sometimes he'll get into a little bit of like geological history or something, but most of the time you couldn't even tell really that he was super educated or anything. They're not hard to read. Sometimes that's to their detriment, though. That's going to get me to a couple of my sticking points with these essays, which is what I'm going to call them, essays. They're very vignette feeling, though, because they're mostly observation, and that's the first thing I'll say, is that there's a lot of just observation here. And when he does get beyond observation and try to try to think about what he's talking about, philosophize. There we go. That's when he breaks down a bit, because he he's an appreciator of nature, and he's really good at doing that. He's really good at appreciating, at observing, at noticing um, non-human things. But when he starts to talk about it, he usually just romanticizes, which has its place. Um, but he just continually romanticizes the non-human world, and looks, he finds lessons in it. Pretty much every essay ends on something of like a high note slash personal resolve slash like take this lesson from the natural world. Like the end of chapter 6 of Spring, which is the smell of the morning, is what it's called. He says that he ends his last paragraph. The smell of the morning is an adventure, and if you can start the day by going outdoors and sniffing the air, there is always a lift to the spirit. If you practice, you may someday even reach the point where you can smell the rain or an approaching storm. But of this you may be sure, whether or not you recapture the primitive perceptions completely, you will discover many things and open up undreamed of avenues of enjoyment. See, and that's just kind of a flat, pat ending for me. And maybe it's because, I like a bit more subtlety, a bit more, not everything tied up so neatly, for different reasons, maybe. But anyway, it's a little pat, it's a little trite, and that's one criticism that I have, is that, and this is the only book I read, and this is his first book, so he probably improved as an essayist to some degree. So usually the heart of the essays are good, really good. He's great as an observer of the world. He doesn't know how to end, though. He feels like if he were my student, I would be saying, you've got to give me a little bit better of a conclusion here. You've got to tie this. You've got to lead me somewhere else with this. So that's one thing. Another thing, like I said, he tends to romanticize the non-human world, which was kind of a big thing in the 1950s. Also, he does talk about indigenous people, Native Americans in here, and it's not bad. Like, he doesn't talk about them negatively by any means, but he also romanticizes and stereotypes and kind of uses the noble savage trope, which again, he was writing in the 1950s. I get it, but still, that's there. Doesn't ruin the book for me, at least. It's not like in every piece by any means, but sometimes he'll, that'll be in there. So that's something that I wish he could have talked about a little better. But again, it was the 1950s, and most white people were just starting to think about those things in different ways at that point. All in all, it was a good read. It's an easy read, pretty quick read. And if you like, stuff about the outdoors, you definitely will appreciate this book. I think it'll make you want to get outside more, if you don't already. He does have a nice essay about labor and like getting into the wilderness and how much appreciation is tied to labor in the summer section. And the summer section for me is the best section, followed pretty closely by autumn. Those are the two best sections in my mind, my two favorite sections. I think summer is by far, though, the best. But chapter 6 of Summer, Flying In, is really good. Basically, he decides to go to this lake that he loves, but he just decides to fly in instead of, he usually canoes and it takes a couple days to get there, and it's great, but he only has like a day to spare. So he flies in, and he gets there, and it's like not as good because he's still like, just flew in, and basically he makes the realization or the point, the claim, that your enjoyment, your appreciation of a primitive place is reduced if you don't spend, the labor to get in there. Like, basically, you can't cheat your way into solitude, is what he's saying. Which is, which, like, I agree with, and it's a nice essay. One of his better, if not best, like, thinking about these issues in a way that's beyond just simple appreciation of them. The next one also is super good. called the Forest Pool, or called Forest Pool, and he basically tells the natural history of this. I think probably fictitious, but I don't know. Forest Pool. Um, you know, he goes back before white settlement, and then tells the story of you know a white trapper settles there, and then the loggers come, and then farmers come, and etc. And that's really cool. Reminded me quite a bit of Aldo Leopold when he's talking about the rings of the tree, and he tells the story of the tree's history. It's a similar sort of thing. But anyhow, The Singing Wilderness, Sigurd F. Olson. Would recommend. Yeah, it'll make you want to come up to northern Minnesota and hike around. Although right now there's snow on, so you'll have to ski around and snowshoe around. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you've read this and have opinions that differ from mine, or know something about Olson that I didn't mention, or something like that. Anything I left out, let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you read another of his books that you think I would enjoy even more than this. But yeah, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't. The next video coming out should be out in a couple of days, hopefully, which is going to be a trip video where I went hiking. Should have been snowshoeing in hindsight, but I just hiked for a couple of miles at the Turtle River State Park, about 20 miles east of Grand Forks. So yeah, watch for that in a couple of days. Otherwise, I'll see you around.